Greg. Oh, my friend, here we are again.
Yep.
This time we are going to have an interesting conversation about gender. Gender. I don't know if you have you seen this in the news lately. Leah Catherine Thomas.
Yes.
How, I guess I should say, she is wanting to be recognized as a biological female. Even as, I should say, I don't know Leah personally, but it is said that she is actually a biological male who chooses to identify as a biological woman and therefore compete in sporting events that are for biological women. So I have a story for you.
Oh, good.
We spoke about stories the other day. I thought, what's the best thing to do? I'll bring a story from my friend here. And maybe this story can launch us into this, I should admit, very difficult conversation. We are talking in this season about these religious meta-narratives, and in the book of Genesis that we spoke about, it says God made the male and female.
Yep.
And it just identifies those two. Okay, here's a story for you. Now, take this in. It's your story now.
Okay.
Herculean Adelaide Barbin. This is an individual who was later named Alexina Barbin. What happened? It's a pretty tragic story, I must say. Mr. Director, try and put that story on the screen. I am sure you can find it, Google it, put it on. There should be, Wikipedia should have that story. So Alexina was assigned female at birth. Okay, so back in the day, and I'm sure it still happens now, someone is born and we take a look and we say, aha, male or female?
Yep. First question asked.
First question asked. So she's assigned the female gender at birth. But then in the course of her life, now so many tragic things happen in her life, and I'm just cutting the long story short is to say, about 30 years later, she's back in court and she's been charged for having an affair with another woman. So back then, this is in the, I should be able to, mid 1800s. Okay. So it's a crime. So they take her to court, and the judge decides that they should have another test.
Okay. So she's assigned.
So she's assigned female
at birth.
At birth.
She's accused of having sex with another woman.
Yes.
And now, just to make sure I'm following the story.
Yes.
The judge has questions about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. How did it happen? The judge says it's impossible. Okay. So they do another examination. And after living all these years as a female, the judge rules that according to what they have seen, she should actually be recognized now as male. And therefore, her entire life changes. Okay. So you used to go to the women's washroom? No more. Now you have to find a way to go into the male washroom. I mean, you can imagine life in the 1800s. I mean, her life just changes
Yep.
totally. And she struggles with that change. And ultimately, she commits suicide. And therefore, the questions are asked afterwards, okay, what happened here? How do we handle this? How do we handle this issue of gender? How do you define gender? I have a definition from you. Here is a definition of gender that is used by not only the World Health Organization, but also the Canadian Institute of Health Research. This, again,
Yep.
we can put it up on the screen for everyone to see. And this is how they define gender. Gender refers to the, catch this word, Greg, socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people.
So why aren't they doing a DNA test?
That is a very difficult question. Why are they not doing a DNA test? I mean, I guess what they are trying to do here is to, where academia is now, I think, is the appreciation that gender cannot only, let me rephrase, gender is not only biological,
Okay.
it is also social. So you can biologically be one or the other, but socially be the direct opposite.
So let me ask this.
Yeah.
In your story, I'll first admit I'm not a medical doctor,
Yeah.
but there is some medical conditions that are out and about that I'm not sure if it's something that they acquire at birth, or it's a genetic defect, or whatever term you want to put on it. But tell me about your understanding of a, quote, a disease that can facilitate some of these radical changes that you talked about in your story.
Oh, yeah. That's a difficult question, and I think this is the place to try and find the nuance in all of this. And I'm sure there are more trained people out there who will comment and give us more feedback on what's really happening here. But my understanding of this whole phenomenon that we're seeing here is that while medically it can be explained,
Yes.
it has been observed, doctors have observed this happens. We have intersex people, we have, I think the missing component, Greg, is still what we observe as far as, biologically, the reproductive organs and all of that. What we observe doesn't quite match what happens socially. And that mismatch maybe is the reason why we have such definitions of gender. Maybe that mismatch is also part of the reason why you and I now have to talk about this as this big idea in religion, and find out exactly where people stand on this. And it is a meta-narrative, basically. This is a religious meta-narrative. Right now, where religion is, we have said in religion that like what I said in the beginning, God made them male and female. But what the world around us is saying, and the people, you know people, I know people, they are saying, well, what about me? What about me? Because if God made the male and female, what about me? Here I am, I exist, I am in front of you, you know me. So what are you saying about me? Am I a defect? Am I, what am I? And that's a difficult conversation, because there are people now who have been left out of the religious meta-narrative, because the narrative, somehow our understanding of the narrative says anything outside of this, I'm sure we're going to talk about this, anything outside of God made the male and female is sin. That's the religious meta-narrative. So maybe let's do it this way, Greg. Let's ask this question first. Did the whole God made the male and female, was there any other people who existed in the ancient world outside of these two big boundaries, male and female? What do you think? Did people exist that didn't fall into those categories?
So just to be clear, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I got your question, did people or entities exist before the creation of Adam and Eve? Is this what you're...
No.
No, okay.
No, post the creation.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
post the creation. Because remember, Greg, in our last conversation, we spoke about the power of stories, okay?
Yes, yeah.
So if I tell a story and I say, well, God made them male and female, and that is the story I'm telling, I have set a boundary for identity, that you're either male or female. And I'm saying, before, is there nuance to that story? Is there something that neither is male or female? And I mean, it's hard. This is a very hard topic, because the words are just so hard to work with. But do you think there are people who exist outside of these two boundaries?
Sure. In my understanding, in my worldview, certainly there is. So let me ask you this: is that when we look at our fingers with these 10 digits, I know of people that were born with 9.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make them less human?
No.
Does that mean to say that we should fix them?
That's a difficult question. I would say no.
So my point is that if we consider, quote, healthy, quote, normal, I'm going to use a normal as a person that has 10 digits on their hands.
Yeah.
Anything less than that, we have to subscribe something that they're not normal. They're deficient.
Yeah.
That's a very simplistic point of view
Yeah.
I'm taking.
Yeah. And maybe let's work with that. Let's work with that for now and say the challenge we will face with your description, your way of accessing this difficult topic is that when someone is born with less fingers than what many people are born with, the amount of fingers you have really does not detail or define your humanity.
Exactly, and I agree with you. It's a very poor and simple one, but I want to run with that for a minute here.
Yeah.
So if we say that normal is 10 fingers, then we have to, in my opinion, say anything less than that is abnormal.
By your argument, yes.
Yeah. So when we say if God created male and female, if we have a deviation from that, I'm using a very simplistic, that implies in my mind something is abnormal, because normal is these two, male and female.
Yeah. So what happens if we go back into the ancient texts where this idea of male and female, the stories that begin the idea of male and female, and then we find that the authors of these stories also discuss something else, then that begins to stretch our definition of normal, does it not?
It does, absolutely. And I'm intrigued by that. I want to be stretched.
Here's one. So we are discussing these religious meta-narratives in the context of, let's say the Judeo-Christian worldview. So let's go to the Jews. Okay. The Jews, the ancient rabbis, these were the fellows who discussed issues of law and everyday living. And it turns out that the rabbis also identify to add on top of the male and female 6 other sexes or gender, to use a loose word, and they discuss these days the androgynous. So in their definition, an androgynous is an intersex person having some aspects of both male and female genitalia. They're actually recognizing someone with some aspects of both male and female as a being that they have to factor into how life and religion works. Okay?
Yep.
There are about 149 references in the Mishnah and Talmud. 149. Just talking about the androgynous.
So they had a lot of time thinking about this problem.
Yeah, and you have on top of the 149, okay, and this is, when I'm talking Mishnah and Talmud, we're talking 1st century to the 8th century, okay, give or take somewhere there. There are 350 references in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. And now we're talking 2nd century to around 16th century of the Common Era. What I'm saying is that this is not a once-off thing.
That's true. Yeah.
This is a reference that the rabbis needed to talk about. I'll give you an example here. In the Jewish law code, for example, the laws of redemption. Okay, if a guy gets married and then he dies before he has children, his brother or another close relative can redeem and then have children on behalf of the deceased family member with his wife. That's Jewish law code.
Yep.
Okay. So the rabbis now have to struggle with that and say, okay, what if the wife is actually androgynous? Does the same law still
I see what you're saying.
apply?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The rabbis have laws about what a woman should do during her menstrual cycle. But then what if the person you're talking about is androgynous? In some aspects male, but in some aspects female. Where do they fall? So suddenly now, Greg, to use your definition, normal gets expanded. This has to be part of our everyday normal now.
So I just want to clarify one thing. My friend who is missing one digit, he is no less of a person than I am.
True.
He is no less valuable. He is equally to every aspect, except that this one was missing one finger.
Yeah. Your friend that you're describing, I'm going to try and get all philosophical here for no good reason, maybe. Your friend that you're describing, you are describing him or her in a world of people where 90% of people have 10 fingers.
Yes.
And therefore, when your friend appears in that world, your friend is different.
Exactly.
But if you were defining your friend in a world where 90% of people have 9 fingers,
I would be the abnormal one.
you would be the abnormal one.
Exactly.
So it turns out that how we see the world around us then affects our definitions of what we see as normal
Yep.
or acceptable or standard. That's a better word, I think.
Yep.
Standard. This is the standard human being. It affects us. And so suddenly when we go back to the ancient world, where we get many of the definitions we choose to use, many of the vocabulary we choose to use, many of the stories we use to draw these cultural boundaries, then suddenly the world, the standard world is increased. Let me give you another one. Another state of being.
Excellent.
The rabbis talk about the Aylonit. Aylonit. Aylonit.
Okay.
Okay? Aylonit. The literal meaning is a little ram.
Okay.
An Aylonit is a female who has not shown physical signs of typical sexual maturity by the age of 20. And then some rabbis say, no, it's actually 18. Then they have a conversation about that. Now, the Aylonit is presumed infertile, often possessing masculine characteristics. Now, you see now the rabbis in the ancient world are taking into consideration not only what the sexual reproductive organs look like, but also the characteristics, how this person carries themselves, how they just do everyday living, So they're saying the Aylonit often possessing masculine characteristics. That's how they are seeing this individual. 80 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud. Another 40 in classical Midrash. In other words, this is not a once-off.
That's true.
This is a conversation that just goes on and on and on because this state of being exists. Someone who is probably identified as female, phenotypically, say you're a female, but everything about themselves, how they carry themselves, how they do life is different to what they are phenotypically identified as. What do you think, Greg?
My response on both of these cases, and obviously you've said there's a number of different classifications they've had.
Yeah.
It becomes a very perplexing issue because the fact that they have taken the time to quantify and name this particular characteristics suggests that they have had a number of these individuals that they've had to that they're working with. It also implies that their society expects them to render a judgment or comment or something of that effect.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just jump in right there, Greg,
Yeah.
because what you're saying is very important. Now, how do we define society? I mean, society, community is this group of people who come together and they have this verbal, or sometimes, doesn't need to be spoken, this contract, this agreement on how we're going to live with each other, okay?
Yeah.
And in the Jewish society that we're talking about here, this community, they have agreed that, like, for example, women will have babies, and that's their role. The male will provide the seed, and that's a religious obligation that every male has to do that. So a religious idea then is challenged by the reality of life. Therefore, the leaders of that community have to meet now and discuss how to handle the reality that has come their way. And the reality in this case is, like, there's one story of a woman who marries and does not have children. And the rabbis give the husband permission to divorce her. So they divorce. The fellow marries another girl, and somehow, God bless her, it was difficult back then, she finds another fellow to marry her. And then she has babies now. And then this guy still does not have children. Now the rabbis have to face that reality and say, okay, where did we get this one wrong? But the point I think you and I are coming to here is that it is not our view of what reality looks like really has to expand. Because this is not something that has just been done in the modern era that we're living in. Now, these are ancient, they are discussing some of these things that they are seeing in their communities where they are not bound. The stories that are bounding their conversation is not that everything is male or female. Hence why these conversations are difficult conversation.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. So what you're describing here, and I think is really, and I'm assuming with all other 70 different terminologies and classifications, that these individuals were at some point in time in early or late childhood or early adulthood started to acquire these traits. And so they grew into these traits, and hence they had that classification or identity at some point in time.
Okay, let's expand this, Greg.
Okay.
Let's expand this, because I think you're bringing up something worth the conversation here. So, a child is born in the ancient world, and they look at the child and they say, that's a girl. Okay? And child B is born also, and they look at child B and say, that's a boy. From that point onwards, these two individuals are going to take two different directions in life. The child that is given the title girl now has to observe some I mean, even the mother is considered unpure for a certain amount of period, different from the mother who gave birth to the male child. The male child is going to be circumcised at some point early in his life. I mean, they're going to grow up as they grow up, the male child is going to learn how to read Torah and all of these fancy things. The girl child is going to be taught different things, household stuff and all of that. As they grow up, when they go to the temple, they're going to sit in different places. They're going to interact with information at the temple differently. They're going to observe their place in society is going to be taught to them as this is your place because you are this, and this is your place because you are this. Hence why I brought that story in the beginning. So now these children have grown up and they've been cultured into this way of thinking. Now they both get married to separate partners. Okay. And it comes back for the girl child when the husband is saying, I want to divorce because she's not a complete human being. And it turns out that actually she's okay. Or it comes back that the girl child says, they find out that she's Ilonit or whichever. Yep. And it's a difficult place to be in because you were raised a certain way, but you know very well that you are something different deep down inside. Or the boy child grows up and comes to a certain stage where the boy child says, I've been doing all these things that males should be doing, but in me, like the rabbis talk about the tone of voice, my voice is low pitched. I behave in this way. I behave in this way. Hence why I think the rabbis had to sit down and say, this is a reality of life. What do we do in our religious narrative to embrace these people? Or I don't like that term, these people, because it creates this us and them mentality. What do we do to acknowledge this state of being? And I think they're having a conversation about that, and it's a worthwhile conversation. And I think it's a conversation that you don't find in all its complexity in the religious conversations of our time, because our religious meta-narrative seems not to accommodate. I might be wrong on this. I feel like the religious meta-narrative of our time, Greg, just says either A or B, and that's it. And anything outside of A or B is some sort of sin or something like that.
So, I want to go back to this. You use the example. Mm-hmm. These children growing up. And I'm going to pick on the female. And ultimately, she has a lot of male characteristics associated with her.
Yeah.
This is something that back in that time is happening biologically. She couldn't run down to a shop downtown and say, hey, I'm tired of being this gender, I want to switch over. So she, not by her choice, was and is this individual that developed male characteristics. Mm-hmm. So I am, in my opinion, from what I'm looking at it, I have a lot of compassion and respect for all people. I have, with this illustration, this story, this child has acquired these male attributes not because of paying some doctor 1,000 shekels.
That's true. So are you saying that there is a clear difference between someone who just chooses to be what they want to be and someone of whom these characteristics develop in them naturally?
I am. I think that is, in my opinion, there is some nuances there that we need to talk about, because I don't believe that we should put everybody in the same, categorize everybody in the same boat when there is a difference on it. Yeah. You know what? Some days I think people should open the door for me and, whatever else. Treat me like a woman. That passes pretty quick. But I'm just saying is that it's not the same if I say, you know what, today I'm going to switch over.
Yeah. The difficulty we run into with that one, and I see your point, is who gets to determine the legitimacy of the choice? Because if I am given the authority, or if I assume the authority to say, well, your choices are not legitimate, I guess what I'm saying, is there a human being that we can trust to be fair on this judgment? I don't know. I don't think so. It becomes very, very difficult because people hold these things in because we all, as human beings, want to be accepted by the community we live in. And if there's something that is outside of the boundaries that my community has drawn for me, I'm going to try and keep that away from my community. And because I want to be accepted. And then there will come a time when I can't do it anymore. And at that time when I say, you know what, I love you guys, but I am here I am outside of the cultural boundary you've drawn. What happens there? Do those who are inside the boundary say, okay, let's investigate how legitimate your statement is? I don't think it's fair because they are within the boundary. Do people outside of the boundary get to determine whether this person is legitimate? It becomes a very complicated and very complex thing. Is it not better if someone says, hey, community, my family, I have to tell you, I am here outside of this boundary that you have drawn? Is it not better for us to just say, we hear you and we see you?
Okay, I kind of like that, but there's a little bit of a problem with that, in my opinion. So here's the deal, from my perspective. The boundary we're talking today is our sexual definition.
Yeah, gender.
Gender.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a gender. And we make a case, you're making a case, and rightly so, that the person has this urge or propensity or whatever term we want to put on it, that he wants to change to a different gender.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine who has Norwegian heritage shared with me an interesting story. Again, it's a story. He says, I read this article. Was put together by researchers that had looked at alcoholism. And his comment was, and I don't know this to be the case, but in Norway in particular, where this is the article here, there was a lot of alcoholism in certain communities. A number of generations, his grandfather, father, son, etc., dealing with alcohol issues. And so when a new child arrived into this community, they had a genetic propensity,
disposition
disposition to alcoholism. As soon as they acquired, or they were exposed to it, it was a huge problem for them. The same researchers did some work in North America and found that a number of the First Nations community had a similar situation. So now you have people in North America that are dealing with these propensities, and in Norway. So let's take, for example, myself here. Okay. This isn't the case. My grandfather was an honest person, and my father was a very honest person, extremely honest person, and I consider myself to be an honest person. But let's say this was reversed. Let's say that my great grandfather was a very efficient thief, and my father was a great thief. Could I not argue that I have the propensity to be a thief also?
I guess you could.
Could be. So we can make a case that we have alcoholism, theft, and you could go down a whole bunch of different things where people have a propensity or weakness in this area.
Yeah. So
now I come to my community and say, well, you have to accept me because I'm a thief. That's who I am. I'm coming out.
Well, Greg,
I'm just saying, is that not a very simplistic way of looking at it?
I think it is. I think there is and I'll disagree with you on this one. I think there is a human tendency whenever discussing something that is outside of our comfort zones to always make worst case scenario examples, like in this example you have someone who wants to make an argument to their community and say, hey, family,
accept me, I'm a thief.
Accept me, I can't help it but just steal all your money. Okay? Which is absolutely, totally different in my view with someone who is saying, I'm not doing anyone harm, but this is what I am as a human being. So it is not fair to the argument to take something and then illustrate it in another worst case scenario. I think if we to be fair to the argument, then we have to then come back and fix the first argument and say, well, in a case where no human being is going to get hurt, if someone says, family, I have this situation and I'm outside of the boundary you've drawn for me.
The alcoholism is a good example. Many people don't get hurt. It's not a problem.
Many people do get hurt, though, don't they?
Yes, many people do. There's no question about it. But there's many people that don't. They can live with it.
Wow.
So I'm just saying is that my argument is not totally out of conceivability.
I don't know. I'll disagree. I would say you have taken a situation of someone whose state of being should not and is not causing any sort of harm to the community. I mean, the moment someone over consumes alcohol, there's going to be some sort of harm that's going to be done to those around them or to themselves. But if someone says, hey, community, you drew this line and you said I should either be male or female, I don't think I fit. Who are they doing harm to? No one. I mean, you can be bruised as a friend to say, oh my goodness, I shared all those male jokes with you, but now what do I do? I mean, but no harm is getting done.
So it's acceptable if there's no pain inflicted on anybody else.
I think it's a different argument if we're talking about something that causes harm to people. It's a totally different argument. Now, it's like saying someone steps out of the boundary and says, hey, family, I gotta admit to you, I actually like taking advantage of kids under the age of 5. Now, we can't use that. That is clearly a different context. But we're talking about a context here, as uncomfortable as it is, where someone says, you have constructed these social structures and you've put names on them, male and female. And I've tried my level best to interact with this social construct, and I am failing. And I'm saying, what do we do at that point as those who are on the other side of the boundary? Do we use the boundary as a way of separating us from that individual, of which, and I might be wrong on this one, I think many religious meta-narratives are doing that. They just say, okay, then it's us and you. Or do we do something different?
So, using this worldview approach, we say, okay, using your argument here, if it's outside the social acceptable norms, then, and it's not doing any harm, we should accept and endorse this activity.
Endorse. I don't know. Mr. Director, maybe you should play back what I said. I don't think I said endorse, but
I don't think you did either.
but that's a good question. Should we endorse it? So maybe let's dial it back to let's go back to the Christian narrative, because we're talking about these Christian meta-narratives. Should Christians endorse any states of being that are outside of what they believe are the standards? Even after our conversation on how you like there's so much that we didn't read about the tum, we didn't read about the the saris. Like, there's just so many states of being that the rabbis were struggling with. But to move away from them and say, okay, if this is our worldview, I guess there are two ways of answering that, Greg. If we choose to ignore the reality of the ancient world, then we can draw that clear line. But if we choose to embrace the realities of the ancient world, and if I may argue, the world we're living in today, then maybe we should not draw clear lines. Maybe draw a line.
So let me throw back the same question that you asked to me here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give the reference here. The 70 different variations that have been defined by the rabbis at that time. And again, this is my understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is this was something that was a genetic, and I'm going to use this word genetic, deviation. And I'm going to use, and that's a poor way of describing it. I agree. There's all sorts of nuances that go in. There was a deviation for them to give it a classification from what we consider standard person, using your criteria.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my point is that if you say, okay, this is something that has happened naturally, is that acceptable to the society at large? I'm arguing yes.
Mm-hmm.
But one day I wake up and say, you know what? Guess what? I really am a woman trapped in a man's body. I want to switch over.
Yeah.
Now I go out and do whatever. And then I say, hey, accept me. There's a difference. So tell me, how would you see this?
First, I guess I should admit this. This is difficult. Because the difficulty lies in how we're so comfortable with things that are black and white. You know, we are so comfortable with, hey, I see this and I see this. I mean, grays are a bit uncomfortable for people. And I hear your question, but I see in your question that desire for clarity. And the best way I can answer that question is maybe with another question. Do we need the clarity? Can't we exist in this gray? Can't we have our being in this area where we don't have all the answers?
So by that very question, you're saying that the rabbis and their 70 definitions really was a waste of time. It should have been all something different.
No, I'm saying the rabbis were finding a way through conversation to exist in a world that is not black and white. I think what we just saw from the rabbis is an acknowledgement that things are not just the way we want to see them. There is more that we don't know, and we're going to struggle through conversation to find ways to integrate this with what it means to be a Jewish human being. It's just my view of it. I mean, we inherited a lot of things, Greg, I think, from Greek tradition. A lot of what we do is still, in the world we live in today, the roots of it are, just back to the ancient Greeks. And the philosophies that the Greeks have given us still govern how we think. So it is easy to take a very Greek mindset where things are either black or white, and then plug it into a society or community where the people were not processing things in the same way. I remember one of my rabbis, people I studied under, they used to tell this, and you hear rabbis everywhere tell this story about a rabbi and his student. They are counseling this couple. It's a marital issue, okay? And the rabbi sits with the man first, and he listens, and the guy tells his story. Oh, she's this, she's that, she's this. The rabbi just nods his head, he agrees, And at the end of the conversation, the rabbi looks at him in the eye and says, "Brother, you're right. You are right." The next day, the rabbi sits down with the wife, and then she goes through the story also. "Oh, he does this, he is a piece of this, and on and on and on and on. At the end of the story, the rabbi does the very same thing.
Yep.
"Hey, you know what, sister? Yeah, you are correct." The student is confused. The student goes to the rabbi afterwards and says, "But Rabbi, yesterday you said he was right, so I thought you were going to put her in her place, and now today you're saying she is right. Now who's right?" The rabbi looks at his student and he says, "You know what? You are right also." Like, that is the Jewish mindset right there. Okay? You can be right and you can be right, but your stories can be different. Truth does not have to be black and white. And I know that's a difficult thing to grapple with, but if we're talking a Judeo-Christian religious meta-narrative, we have to somehow find a way to factor that into our thinking, that this thing that is not black or white is maybe also a part of the bigger picture of what is true. Individuals with different states of being exist. They are here, and therefore, let's not be, let's engage, let's discuss, let's build life together and find ways in the Jewish narrative to give glory and praise to the Creator and live at peace with each other and find ways. You know what I'm trying to say here? Like we take this Greek narrative and we feed it into a Jewish mindset where, and especially an ancient Jewish mindset where the two really don't mix, they don't jive. They are two different philosophical ideas to approach the world. I mean, you've read it, Greg. The Jewish authors will talk in the New Testament about Jesus, the Messiah, and refer to him as the lion and the lamb. Two animals cannot be any different. In fact, one eats the other. But he's both. And both of those statements, as opposite as they seem to each other, are equally true. And I'm saying by the same concept, by the same argument, can't I then take this argument and say, you know what, maybe it is also true that human beings have several states of being, even though I don't understand them all.
So I'm challenged by a comment you made a couple of moments ago about truth. You mind talking a little bit about this concept of truth that you have? It's not black or white. It's an ever-changing color.
Yeah.
So, because if something is true today, it should be true tomorrow.
Should it?
It should be true yesterday, too.
Well, it is true that today there is no snow outside. Is that statement equally true on January the 3rd or...
I'm praying that it will be.
No, but you know,
yeah, no,
the way you're asking that question is very Greek, I think, in the way you're asking it, because in the Greek mindset, something is either true or not. That is Greek philosophy. This thing is either true or not. The Jewish philosophy is a bit different, I think. Okay. This thing is true, and this other thing is not true.
So then, considering we're talking about Jewish culture, and you're the one that brought up a reference out of the Bible.
Yeah, unfortunately, but yeah.
So if we go back to the Bible, there's some fairly strong statements regarding men and the activities that are oftentimes associated when men switch over.
Yeah, and I think it's worth talking about them, or else what are we doing here? We have to talk, context, nuance, and all of that. So let's pick one, Greg. Pick one.
Well, the one that is a very famous one is in Genesis, and again, last session we referred to the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
And in Genesis 19 and about verse 8, there's a story about Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, the word Sodom and sodomy is quite well defined and used today.
Yeah.
So again, that would be an area that I'm interested in hearing you comment on. And there's a few more, but I'm just saying
let's start there.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
Because what I'm coming to is that I'm uncomfortable with this idea that there is some personal truths that are fluid, and I understand that the state of the weather is a, to use it that is a, to use your earlier argument, it's a pretty thin one.
Okay, it's an unfair argument.
It's an unfair argument. Okay. But when it comes to ethical issues and moral issues, are you saying that this is the same thing? That is fluid.
Moral issues. What is morality? What is?
I'm bringing up morality, and I agree with you.
Yeah. What is morality? What is ethical? Maybe let's launch into it with that story. Let's use that story as a launch pad. Okay, that's Genesis 18.
Yeah, I think it's 19.
19.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Director, you'll correct us. Yeah, it's.
I could be wrong, but I think it's 19.
So you have
verse 8. Yeah. So
what turns out to be angels.
Yeah. So why don't you know the story? Why don't you set it up for us?
Yeah, you have two angels. Actually, before I do that, let me do that. Then we'll talk about this later. You have two angels who come into this city, okay, Sodom, and no one wants to take them into their home, okay. And remember, this story is told...
Except Lot. There's one guy.
Yeah, there's one guy.
Yeah.
There's one guy, Lot. This story is told in the context of the hospitality code of the ancient Near East, okay, where the guest in your home is so important. If you have a guest in your home, you treat them like kings. Anyone who has visited any of the Bedouin tribes, even to date, will attest to that. Like, you treat people, your guests are treated as kings. So in that narrative, as the biblical text says, the man that evening, the man of the city, and listen, the description is quite beautiful. The story is told in a beautiful way. When they sat down to eat, which is something that's praised in the hospitality code, you give people food. When they sat down to eat, the men of the city came together. And they were pounding on the door now. And they were demanding, bring these men out so we can know them. Okay? Now I can go to that thing that I wanted to talk about before I told you about this story, the summary of this story. The very word sodomy. When you and I hear it today, it conjures up certain thoughts, images, and the likes. And the question is, did the ancients, the people in this story, when they heard the word sodomy or Sodom, did they have the same images in their minds? Because what happens now is that we come to this story, Greg, and you and I have our own biases from the time we live in. and we lift those and bang, we pluck them into an ancient story.
Yep.
And already the name of that place already is condemned.
Yep.
Because we're bringing our own biases
Yep.
from the world we live in to the world they lived in. And so, I mean, if we had our way, which we would have written a petition to change the name of the city to begin with. But what I'm saying is that the way we are seeing things is different from the ways they are seeing things and defining things. Okay? And so we then have gone forward to say, oh, the great sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was sexual immorality. Here's the concept you are bringing up here of morality. These individuals, these men, were wanting to, therefore, thus, were used to having sexual interactions with other men. And the Bible says that is not okay, and God destroyed that city for that. Okay. Fair argument? Is that a good assessment of the
Yep,
meta-narrative?
Yep.
Here are the problems.
There is a few.
Yeah. I mean, let me not call them problems. That's not fair. Let me say, here's the nuance. Here's a couple of nuances that we need to factor in. Number one, the religious biblical text is written in a very androcentric society, meaning it is a society that writes with the male being the representative of all the human beings. Like, take for example a story most people know in the New Testament where Jesus feeds 5,000 men.
Yes.
It doesn't tell us how many women were there. It doesn't tell us how many children were there. I mean, after all, we do know that in that story, it was a child who brought the food that Jesus multiplied. So they were children there.
Well, after counting 5,000, you got tired.
Yeah. So the writers of the biblical narrative will use the term men to refer to everyone.
Yeah. And
Okay.
that is a well-established concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I take that idea and I go back to the story of Sodom, and I'm just bringing the nuances here, okay? You can argue 2 or 4 against this, but I'm just saying the story is not as simple as we would like it to become simple, okay? Because we are bringing our own biases back into the ancient world. So if I'm reading this in the context of the ancient world and I say, and the text says, the men came out. You want me to accept that there were no women there?
Yeah, and in that case, and legitimately, that is probably the case. There was more than men.
Yeah.
Yeah, without doubt.
Yeah. So suddenly you factor only that in, and then suddenly the story begins to expand. So if we're going to make a case for unlawful sexual interactions between men alone, but what do you do with the women who are also pounding on the door saying, bring these men out so we can know them? Because if there were women there, and if the term men is generic, not only masculine to speak of the male who is identified biologically as, blah, blah, blah. You hear what I'm trying to say?
I got it, yeah.
Okay, so, all right. Now, I'll be the first to admit that argument can go so many different directions, but it is there. It's not something we should ignore.
Yes.
And then secondly, how about all the other prophets and writers of the Bible? What was their assessment of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah? What was the great sin of Sodom?
Yep. There's some problems.
There's some problems there, yeah.
There's some problems there.
Let me read one for you. I'm just going to pull it up on my,
Sure. Yeah.
And Isaiah. Okay? Isaiah talks about what happened in Sodom. Oh my goodness. And beginning in verse 9 of Isaiah chapter 1, he says, if the Lord of heaven's armies had not left us a few survivors, we would have quickly been like Sodom. We would have become like Gomorrah. And now Isaiah then goes on to describe what was happening there. The so-called, if we want a picture of what Isaiah thinks Sodom was, here it is. Okay? It says, listen to the Lord's message, you leaders of Sodom. Pay attention to our God's rebuke about the people of Gomorrah. Of what importance to me are your many sacrifices, says the Lord. Okay. I have had my fill of burnt sacrifices of rams, of fat, and on blood of bulls or lambs and gods I do not want anymore.
So the people of Sodom and Gomorrah
Yeah.
are out giving sacrifices to God.
Yeah, I think Isaiah here is using Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of what is happening in his time in Israel. Okay.
Got it. Okay.
So if we're going to make an argument about the problems that Sodom was having, according to Isaiah, we should say their worship was meaningless.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
They had gone into the habit of just rehearsed and no sincerity.
Okay.
Okay. And then it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Do not bring any more meaningless offerings. I consider your incense distastable. That's a very big English word for my tongue. I hate your new moons, your festivals, and all of this. Is wash and cleanse yourselves, remove your sinful deeds from my sight and stop sinning. And then verse 17 says, learn to do what is right, promote justice, give the oppressed reason to celebrate, take up the cause of the orphan, defend the rights of the widow. Come, let's consider your options, says the Lord. So God is saying, Isaiah is saying, if there is a problem that I had with Sodom and Gomorrah, the number one is that it was a pretty, what's the English word here? Inhospitable place. And they just didn't care about other people. They didn't care about, again, that hospitality code, which is so evident in the original story of Sodom and Gomorrah. As they sat down to eat, no one would welcome them in their homes. Lot welcomed them in their homes. So Isaiah says absolutely nothing about men having sexual interactions with other men as something that was the sin of Sodom. How do you handle that?
Not very well. Arguably, Isaiah didn't get the full picture about what's happening in Sodom and Gomorrah.
I mean, one could argue that.
So then there's other texts in the Jewish tradition and literature. Isaiah or Leviticus. We have stuff in Leviticus. We have stuff in Jude.
Jude is a good example. Let's go to Jude. Let's go to Jude. Jude, I think that's Jude 1:7.
Yes.
Yeah, Jude 1:7. That's a very, very interesting text. I'm going to open it here.
Okay.
I'm going to try and open it here so we can, and I want to read it.
Okay.
And then show you that things are not as black and white as we'd like them to be. So, also, Sodom and Gomorrah, Jude says, or writes, in the neighboring towns, since they indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desires in a way similar to these angels, are now displayed as an example by suffering the punishment of eternal life. It does say sexual immorality.
Yeah.
right there in Jude. But if you look at the word that is used there for sexual immorality, it is what the good people who work on that side of the street choose to call I think it's hapex, yes, hapex legomenon.
Sorry, could you say that again? I'm not familiar with that terminology.
Hapex legomenon.
Okay.
It means it is a word, a unique word that appears only in that text. Just once.
Once only.
Once. And you and I know very well that you can count on both hands plus your toes how many times in the Bible, New Testament in particular, where it talks about sexual immorality. And how is it that such a big topic in the New Testament? I mean, Jesus alone discussed this at least 5 or 6 times. Okay.
Yes.
How is it that such a big topic, when it comes to Jude uses this one Greek word that is not used anywhere else? So then you have to ask yourself, what did the translator...
What was his biases?
Exactly. What was the translator's bias? And it could very well be that the translator is in this community that has seen the story of Sodom, the very word Sodom, as some sort of perversion, sexual perversion, and then they just read that or write that into their translation. Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know who did the first translation. I can't argue for or against them. But what I am saying is that here they are in the text using a very strange, unique word, and somehow, someone decided that this fits. There are Bible translations out there. I think like the New English translation. They will have notes on top by the side there, and the notes point out exactly that this is problematic. The translation that has been used there, like I think the literal Greek translation is strange flesh. Just to translate it literally. Okay, so the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring towns, since they indulged or they participated in strange flesh. Greg, I don't know what strange flesh is. There's a huge temptation in me because of my biases to translate it as sexual immorality. But to be honest, I don't think most people know what strange flesh is. So Jude, as you go to Jude to try and back that idea up in the story of Sodom, you don't have much ground to stand on.
So what about Leviticus?
Okay, let's go to Leviticus. That's Leviticus what? Remind me again.
I think it's 18, 22, I think it is, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to open it up here. Leviticus 18:22. Mr. Director, please put that on the screen also. Leviticus 18:22. It says, do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman.
That's fairly straightforward.
At first, until you stop and say, okay, what's really... Greg, we spoke about that thing where we take our limited vocabulary of our world and the definitions of it, and then we pluck it into a different context, a different world.
Yes.
And we want it to make the same sense there. Okay?
Yep.
So let me bring something up because, hey, we're big on context and nuance here.
Yes.
Okay? In the ancient world, unlike us today, sexual relationships were defined or at least viewed as either who is the penetrator and who is the penetrated. Okay, that's their worldview. Who does the penetration? Who gets penetrated? And that's how they are seeing the world around them. Okay, Jews in particular. This is in Leviticus. This is the legal material that's governing their everyday living.
Yes.
Okay, the Jews in particular see the penetrator and his seed, the seed in particular, as something that is given by God so they can reproduce. Okay, so hence it is problematic in the Jewish mindset when seed goes to waste. Like you go through the Talmud, the rabbis just talk about this left, right, and center. Seed should not go to waste. So when you when you position yourself in their way of thinking, before you bring our modern way of thinking into the ancient world, where that thought process, the way they are viewing the world, and then we come back to this text. Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. Why do people have sexual relations with a woman? So they can reproduce. So they can have other human beings.
That's one reason.
That's one reason, I guess, yeah. So does it make sense then, if I'm to read it that way and say maybe the text is saying, do not have sexual relations for the purpose of reproduction with a man?
Well, these people weren't stupid. They understood that that's not going to happen.
Well, if you say that, Greg, you have to say that about a lot of the laws you'll find in Leviticus, to say, why say it? Because this is pretty obvious.
So do you have any examples of that? I'm just saying this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the next law.
Okay.
That could be a good example.
Okay.
Do not have sexual relations with an animal. Okay? It's all in the context of sexual relations that are not legal, because in their worldview, when you have these sexual relations, they do not lead to what should happen when you have a sexual relationship. The birth of more people. Okay? So do not have sexual relationships with an animal and defile yourself with it. Again, to use your argument, that's pretty obvious. Why would you say it? So now you have an entire legal code that is emphasizing on what you and I think it's pretty obvious. But they are saying it. Maybe it's obvious to you and me that if you sleep with an animal, well, science people out there might argue differently. And hey, if you search long enough online, you find a whole lot of things. Yeah. But if you have sex with an animal, you shouldn't reproduce with an animal. It sounds obvious, but there's a reason why these legal codes are being stated.
So if you're the one that brought this up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. You brought this up. If you have sex with an animal, what harm is it doing?
If you have sex with an animal, what harm is it doing? In the Jewish legal code, the harm that you're doing is that you are not bringing more human beings to life. It's wasted seed. Do not waste seed.
So a few minutes ago, you made an argument
Yeah.
that if I'm doing
And you're not harming anyone?
Not harming anyone.
Yeah.
What's the issue?
A few minutes ago, I did make that argument, Mr. Director. Did I make that argument? Play that back. Yes, I did. I did make that argument a few minutes ago.
So now?
Yeah. But a few minutes ago, Greg, we're not talking about the context of a boundary that a religious community has drawn for themselves. Now, I think you and I hope you and I can agree that we should not only have sex so that we can reproduce.
I agree.
Sex can be for fun.
Yes, I agree.
People can enjoy sex. Okay. The religious worldview that you and I are existing in is different from that these guys are existing in. So the statement I made about what harm is there, we're talking in the context of the world we live in. I think we were.
Yes.
There is no harm. Someone comes out and says, family, there is a boundary and I am here. They are not murdering anyone. They're just saying, hey, here I am. Will I be accepted? The Jewish legal boundary they had drawn involves the ideas that we just spoke about. Number one, seed is important. The male sperm is important. It needs to find a place that's going to receive it, and then more human beings will come into the world. That's why you have stories in the Hebrew Bible. If someone ejaculates on the ground, God struck them. What's that guy's name? I forget his name. God killed him, they would say. And it's a difficult story to try and understand. Maybe we should have a conversation about difficult stories.
I think we should. We're having one right now.
We're having one right now. It's a difficult story to understand. But then the cultural boundary that has been drawn around this says seed is important. A woman needs to be able to get pregnant and give birth. And then her value in society also is measured by her ability to give birth. So in that world, I think, where that is the boundary that has been drawn, it makes sense to see a law that says, don't have sex with an animal. Don't have sex with another man. Not because the argument is one of homosexuality, as we tend to call it, but it's the one of a different religious narrative. All I'm saying here, Greg, is that this is the nuance in this. There's so many levels of nuance, and the context in this is just so, it's bigger than what we would like to acknowledge. The religious meta-narratives of our time like to compress things so that people can fit into a compressed version of reality. And unfortunately, every time we do that, people are left out. And I'm saying, no. Let's not be afraid to bring this narrative in all its, nuance and all these difficult things. And I do not claim to even have all the answers to it. But in the complexity of these meta-narratives that we like to compress, there is a room for everyone.
Yes, and that I agree. And I think that point that you make is extremely powerful, is that we are valued because we are humans. We are valued because we are the children of God. And the Genesis story makes that really clear. Because I may be born with some genetic variations that cause me to morph, and we use that term loosely, into a person that the society didn't expect as going to be. Yeah. Or I have, for whatever reasons, chosen to make life choices that are complicated, or my sexual preferences are not standard, using your term, that person is still a valued person, and it's still one that carries what I want to say, the fingerprints of God on.
Yeah.
And I believe that we have to be very careful on how we approach this subject matter, and we need to be very understanding and accepting. And I think one of the things that the Christian tradition, Christian churches, have oftentimes drawn lines in the sand, and and I've used examples here why they do that.
Yeah.
It is really important that we we need to put the context in, and we need to put the understanding that you've just shared with us on it. It's not all black and white.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And I think when we embrace that, it doesn't shrink our world. It actually makes it larger.
Yeah.
And then that large world can embrace more people. Like the rabbis tried to do this. Like there's a rabbi who makes the argument that Sarah, Abraham's wife,
Yes.
was Ilonite. So that could be the reason why she couldn't have children earlier in life. And I mean, you could argue, say, no, she was not. She was just barren. But what the rabbi is doing here is that she's saying to the people who recognize as Ilonite, the rabbi is saying, hey, it could very well be that Sarah was also exactly what I am seeing in my community around. And then they have that conversation. Now, suddenly, the world is bigger.
You've included them.
You've included people.
Excellent.
And you're not pushing them out. And you're not limiting who gets to say they belong. And I think the Christian religious meta-narratives have to be big enough to embrace people and say, we see you.
Yeah.
And you belong ultimately. And not only Christian, but I think our communities, there's a wise, very, very, very wise fellow who once said to me, I need you to stop hearing it as people saying, I am coming out. I need you to hear it as people saying, I'm inviting you in.
Ah, it's brilliant.
Because when I'm invited and you invite me into your home, you'd be very upset at me if the first thing I do is kick your fridge, break some windows, start rearranging your furniture.
Yes, I would be upset with
You'll
that.
be so upset at me. But if I come in your home and I appreciate your home and I sit down and I say, I see your home. This is where you are. You are more open now to say, well, okay, now, do you want to see this also? And then you draw me into the complexities of your home. But if I come into your home swinging with my bat, destroying everything I don't like, smashing the TV, you'll kick me out so quickly.
Yeah.
So he says to me, Frank, don't see this as saying, I'm coming out. See this as an invitation, saying, hey, come in. Come into my home. See where I stay. See where I am. And Greg, there's a story. I just love stories. The Hebrew Bible has a story of Hagar.
Yeah.
That is the former servant of Sarai, the lady we were just talking about. When Sarai couldn't have children, she came up with a brilliant idea. Again, in the world we live in, we're like, why would you say it's a brilliant idea? But in the world they lived in,
It made sense.
made sense.
Yeah.
Abraham, tonight you're going to go and sleep with my maid, and then she's going to have babies, and those babies are going to be mine.
Yeah.
Yay! That's a brilliant idea in their world. So Abraham does that, and of course things don't go well in that relationship. And as the child grows, I mean, Sarah just does not like how that deal has played out, and so she kicks her out. I like the last part of that story, and they get to a place and things are pretty bad. I think this is Genesis, Mr. Director, if you want to put that on the screen, it's Genesis 16, okay? Sarai is pregnant,
Yeah.
okay, at this point, and she's out in the wilderness. She's giving up on life. It wasn't her idea to sleep with her master's husband.
So you're talking about Hagar now.
Sorry, Hagar.
Yeah.
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah.
It wasn't her idea.
Okay.
She's literally just out there.
Give us a bit of a context. Is this
Okay.
Hagar a lady that's probably in her late 30s?
No, absolutely not. This is a young girl we're talking about. I mean, scholars estimate that she's probably in her maybe mid to late teens.
Oh, really? Okay.
She's a young girl.
She's a teenager.
She's a teenager, probably at this point. And she's out in the wilderness. She's pregnant. I mean, trying to figure out pregnancy. Like, I mean, you and I can't even speak to this. Okay.
I don't want to either.
Yeah. And she's out there. She's crying. She has given up and she's ready to die. God came looking for her. And I want to read it in verse 13, how she responds to that interaction with God. It says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. And she said, I have now seen the one who sees me.
That's it. That's fantastic.
Jeez, I get him. He sees me. I felt like I was alone. My mistress is hard on me, and the guy I slept with to have this baby, it seems like he doesn't care. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I am thirsty. Like, this is a crisis. Now I'm just going to give up and die. And then God says, Hagar, I see you. I see you. And Greg, I think when people invite us in, the best thing we can do when we get in is to say, I see you. And they can say, oh, they see me. They see me.
Yeah.
Not to go into someone's house and say, whose great idea was it to paint this wall purple? No.
Yeah.
How about we say, oh, purple wall, I see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That story really resonates with me because that young lady probably, as you pointed out, and rightly so, was not of a high value person in that society. She was a servant girl to begin with. And I don't know what that, probably she was bought somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
And so she was seen as an asset, but a replaceable asset.
Yeah.
And now we see this God in heaven coming looking for her and says, I see you.
I see you.
That is
She's
exciting.
standing. She's standing right there on the other side of the cultural boundary that has been drawn for her. And she says, I am here. And God says, and I see you. And God goes on to say, listen, the baby you're going to give birth to is going to be called Ishmael. the L part of that name being God's name. And God gives so many promises to her because God sees her. God gets involved. And I'm saying it is easy to go with, gender. Well, the World Health Organization defines this way. Well, the religious meta-narrative says we are this or this, and then and everything is just black and white when the reality looks different. How about we take those definitions and all those crutches we use to get through the world, just put all of that aside and say to humanity, people we share this human experience with, just say to them, I see you. I see you.
Yeah.
Just put our judgments aside.
I recognize who you are. I see you as you are.
Yeah.
I don't see you as somebody got to fix.
No.
I just see you as you are.
I just see you as you are.
Yeah.
You know what, Greg? Again, you and I can talk the entire day about this. You and I talk about everything, I guess. But again, for everyone who's watching this, please, just like, and subscribe, so we can have more conversations like this, and talk to us. Just talk to us. And if there's anyone out there, I guess also, who feels like this conversation really was about them, I just want to affirm that we see you.
Yes.
We see you and we recognize who you are. And in celebration of this festival of context, nuance, and conversation, I want to invite people to go to the website and get yourself that never black and white t-shirt and celebrate this. But until then, until the next time we talk again,
we'll have another difficult conversation.
May your world be big enough to see everyone.